So it's September 7th, Wednesday. Tomorrow the NFL season starts. And in honor of the NFL season started, something I was going to do last year and I didn't get the time to. I picked every single game in the entire NFL schedule uh, because I feel like if when people do a win total, it doesn't accurately depict all the games, I don't think. I think they're just trying to guesstimate. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to be picking the NFL schedule. So what we got is I made an Excel spreadsheet of the entire season. This is just the AFC right now. Showing just basically, what I'm thinking. Because I mean, this, you can just say a flat win-loss total, and you may be wrong, you may be right, but you got to look at the schedules to see exactly. And that's what I kind of did here. So I'm just going to start at the top. I'm a Steelers fan. We obviously are unsure right now who our quarterback. Mitch Trubisky was just announced our starter, so he'll be the starter this week. And because I'm a Steelers fan, they're obviously going first. It's in the AFC North, I obviously put first. I look at Pittsburgh, and I look and I'm saying, you know, we play the NFC South, and I think it's the AFC East. That's who we're playing. We got a bunch of tough games, and obviously our offensive line is not very good. But I picked this to go 9-8. And there's another thing for this schedule before I really get into it. I actually made a reasonable win total for each team, which means that I picked these games and then I basically said, okay, what's best and what's worst case scenario that's within reason. And so obviously I got the team names on the right now. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and take my camera out. So basically what we got is the AFC North first, looking at the Steelers 9-8, but I actually believe they could do as bad as 6-11, or they could do as good as 10-7. Realistically, I look at games that I picked them to win, like the home game versus Cleveland, at Philadelphia. Either the Patriots or the Dolphins could give us trouble, and then obviously the Ravens. I just feel like that's a game that's so close it can go either way. That's why I have them splitting. But in Pittsburgh's case, they're going to be 9-8 is what I'm showing. And I'm just going to summarize this. I'm going to do probably a video every week saying, oh, do I agree with what I've picked for the next week? But this is just more of a summary. Obviously, the Ravens are going to be healthy this year because all these rankings are picked based off of if nobody gets hurt. That's why I'm going to do a week to week thing too. The real reason the Ravens are 12-5 because a lot of people don't think they're that crazy good is just the scheduling. I mean, they're pretty much, you know, let's say they don't lose at New England. Let's say that they win that game, but then, they may lose at Tampa Bay or something to that effect. 12-5 is pretty high, but if you look at the schedule and the way it kind of falls for them, that's not unreasonable. And I have a 10-13 for the Ravens. The Bengals, coming off a Super Bowl appearance, it's one of them deals where they're probably going to be the best roster, offensively at least, in the game. They're going to have the best offense in most games. You could you can argue maybe Kansas City, probably not with the loss of Tyreek Hill. You know, are there any teams going to fight them on the offensive side of the ball? More than likely not. But obviously, this is a whole team game with defense. I think they go on a little bit of a losing streak, but in theory, they could win those games. That's why I have them at an 11-14 reasonable win total. I have them at 13-4, but they could win as many as 14. I don't think they go higher than that, just because they're going to have to really protect Joe Burrow this season. And then the Browns, obviously, Deshaun Watson ain't coming back until week 13, and so I think them being what 5-5, 5-6 for him to come back at Houston is pretty optimistic. I mean, Not saying Jacoby Brissett or anybody like that couldn't take over, and their defense is pretty decent, and they have, there's talent all around the Browns team. It's more of them just putting it together. And then realistically, they could win the game at Pittsburgh versus the Saints. They could beat they should beat the Texans, but just because it's the fact of it's Deshaun Watson going back to the Texans, I got them losing that game. And so realistically, they could win 11 games. I got them higher than Pittsburgh because I think their potential was higher than Pittsburgh's is. And so then we're going to switch down to the AFC West, which I think is the toughest division in football by far. And realistically, what you're going to have with them is you're not going to have a high win team. Like 12 wins is going to be pretty tough to get for any of them, just because they have 6 games against each other in the division. You have Kansas City, who they're now coming out of the phase of having the target on their back. They lose Tyreek Hill. What do? As far as offense, they shored up their offensive line, which was the issue against Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl a few years ago. Patrick Mahomes is he is hitting his phase where he's going to have to adapt because people are starting to figure him out, but he's skilled enough he can do it. But realistically, you're looking at what games could they lose? I mean, like I said, the Raiders games, the Chargers games, the Broncos games, any in division games are toss ups. I think all those teams are solid. Obviously, Kansas City and the Chargers are both, I think, are 11-6 teams. I think they split their season series, and then they also have to play the NFC West. The AFC West has to play the NFC West. Tough division versus tough division, but realistically, I think the Raiders come out on top of this. They added Davante Adams offensively, Chandler Jones defensively. I just think they have non-conference, and then their random games that they play, I feel like are more favorable than maybe the Chiefs and the Chargers. And so I think the Raiders are going to come on top of that division, come out on top. I think Russell Wilson adds another element to the Broncos, a really solid defensive team, maybe an offensive team that has weapons. But I don't know if it's going to be enough to push them to, a championship, maybe not even the playoffs with as good as the AFC is. And then you move on to the AFC South. And I'm looking at, I look at Indianapolis and I'm saying you got a solid rock, 7 Pro Bowlers, multiple All Pro players, arguably one of the best, defensive players in the league, and Darius Leonard. Obviously, he's had some injury issues and whatnot. You add Matt Ryan to a team. I mean, solid offensive line. Jonathan Taylor's great. You had some good receivers. I think the Colts have a breakout possibility. They're my dark horse to win the Super Bowl. Dark horse, but they could do it. I just think this for Tennessee will be another year of what essentially would be a 9-7 year, but since there's another game, it's going to fall to a loss versus a win. They play a lot of tough games. I mean, the AFC South plays a lot of tough games anyway, but you look at Tennessee and they have to go to Buffalo. Obviously, they play the AFC West in general, but then they have to play, have to go to Green Bay. They have to go to Philadelphia. And you're talking about some games that can be toss-ups, and their defense has not really changed as much as it has in a few years ago. They lose Julio Jones to the Buccaneers. I mean, you're looking at a team that's probably going to go 9-8. The Texans is going to be rough for them. I'm not saying they can't pull out a few wins, and the tough part with picking these games was picking the upsets, like games they could win, and deciding, if Jacksonville's going to win a game, if Houston's going to win a game, or the Giants or the Jets, or whenever they're all playing each other, and the Bears and Seahawks. I'm not saying they're all at the same level, but it's kind of like those games would be within reason for anybody to win. And that's why I have the Texans at a 1-5 win, a reasonable win total, because they could win all those, they could flip all those games, but they may steal a big game from a team, but it's going to be really tough. And Jacksonville, You're going to have a second-year Trevor Lawrence. Travis Etienne's going to be in the backfield with him. He'll be comfortable. Maybe get some Clemson chemistry going between those guys. You have guys like Josh Allen on the defense who are going to improve every year. But I think Jacksonville's best case scenario is to win all the games against kind of so-so opponents. And maybe they still, like, last year they beat the Bills, so maybe they steal a game. But honestly, I think it's really the Colts division to lose. And then you go to the AFC East and you look at the Bills, and I just think they're outside of the 49ers and Rams. I think it's Rams, 49ers, Bills might have the most complete roster. Their offensive line is lacking a little bit. But the tough part of this was picking who do they lose to, because I don't like picking a 15-2 team. I absolutely do not like it. But you look at the schedule and you're like, well, I mean, other than the two losses I picked, which were at Kansas City and at Cincinnati, what they could lose at the Rams, and they might maybe lose at the Ravens, and they win, at home, or they lose at home versus Green Bay. But other than that, unless they drop a big one. I mean, 12 to 15 wins is reasonable for them. And they're the best team in their division by far. So they should, in theory, go 5-1 or 6-0 in division games. And then you go to the Patriots, second year Mac Jones. What do they do in the, what do they do in their division? What do they do in these, I mean, like I said, tough games for the Patriots? I mean, you go to Miami, you go to Pittsburgh, then you at home versus the Ravens, you go to Green Bay. I mean, that's not an easy slate to start the season. And then you finish it, look at the last few weeks of the season. Home versus Buffalo, at the Cardinals, at the Raiders, home versus the Bengals, home versus the Dolphins, and at Buffalo. I mean, that's not an easy end either. And then you go to the Dolphins, who are another Titans level team, I think. I'm thinking, once again, they have a rough week 2 through 4, which I think they'll lose every one of those games, and then they're gonna grab some wins here and there, and they could sweep New England in theory. They could steal a game. Maybe they beat Pittsburgh. Maybe they beat Cleveland. Maybe somehow they beat Green Bay or whatnot. An 8-9 team, 9-8. I think that's pretty reasonable for Miami. The Jets, unfortunately for the Jets, they were already not a great playoff team. Not if they aren't going to make the playoffs, but they weren't a great team competitively anyway. And then you lose Zach Wilson, and you're like, well, I mean, how can we make something out? Like, we want to show promise. So we want to show that we're heading towards a winning direction. But 2-15, and it's really, like I said, you play the NFC North. You play the AFC North. I mean, there's not many games the Jets are going to realistically go into with the better roster, or even a competitive one against the team. I mean, you look at the Bears, you look at the Jaguars, the Seahawks, maybe the Lions. It's going to be rough. And that pulled up. Now I'm going to scroll down to that was the AFC. I'll get to the playoffs because I actually predicted those games too. So here's the NFC. And realistically, in my opinion, I'm not sure how much the Davante Adams departure from Green Bay is going to affect them. Because yes, I do believe that it's going to hurt. First of all, Aaron Rodgers really doesn't throw to many younger guys. He really trusted Davante and favored him in big moments. But I look at Green Bay's schedule, and if in their defense this year is probably the best it's been since Aaron Rodgers, since they won the Super Bowl with AJ Hawk and with Clay Matthews and with those guys, their defense is probably almost at that level, maybe not quite. But you look at their schedule and you're like, well, I mean, they play the NFC East and they play the, let's see, I didn't miss. I think it's the AFC East too. Yeah, they play the AFC East and the NFC East. You play in a division where honestly the Bears and Lions are probably not going to be competitive. The Vikings could shock some people, so that's why I have them losing at Minnesota week 1 because I feel like Minnesota's good enough to steal that one. But other than that, I mean at Buffalo, maybe Dallas throws in a competitive game, maybe the Buccaneers, but it's week 3 and with the Bucks having a broken offensive line that's going to be kind of tough. And then, you know, the Rams versus the Rams that in the Tundra, which is, that's kind of how I think they may steal a game versus the Rams. But other than that, I mean, they don't have many tough games outside of them. So, I mean, 12 to 15 wins is reasonable for Green Bay. Minnesota, like I said, could shock people. And they have a really good offensive team. Their defense, if it comes along, it gives you a top half of the league defense, maybe creeping to the top 10. You're looking at a Minnesota team that could win 14 games. I don't have them winning 14 because I don't think it's really reasonable as of right now, but I have them like winning, because they could win at Philadelphia. They could win at Miami. They could win at Detroit. They may lose to the Colts, but, 13 wins is not out of the question. The Bears have a roster that's not. You have the complications that we've had with Roquan Smith over the offseason. You have obviously Justin Fields is in his still trying to figure out. He's a talented player, but you have to have talent around talent to make it really thrive, and it's almost hindering him. And I don't really know how it's going to sit for Chicago, especially if they can't figure out the Roquan Smith thing, because then you don't have a leader for the defense really. And then you go to Detroit. Detroit, I think, has a chance to not make a playoff push, but maybe give promise to next year. You saw them on Hard Knocks. Dan Campbell's really coaching them guys up. You look at the games that I've picked for them to win, and you're thinking I think the only ridiculous one is they might not win at home versus Minnesota. But other than that, they could win at Carolina, they could win at Chicago, they could win, at Dallas, at New England. They could probably win the home game versus the Dolphins. So I mean, the Detroit team, I think I put 6 to 9 wins just because I think they'll lose just as many of those questionable games as they'll win. But I honestly think that they have a chance to make something out of it. It's just a matter of how they play game to game, which is another reason why I'm going to do this week by week. And I'm going to kind of look at who I picked and then see, do I agree with this? Do I think this is still correct? The Rams are a team that I'm just like, well, I mean, what do they have? What is their weakness on their team? Like, honest to God, what is weak on the Rams? Um, you're like, well, maybe they're secondary, maybe they're all O line, but I think they're good enough to win a Super Bowl, both of them, because that's what they just did. Um, I got them losing tomorrow night at home versus Buffalo. I just think maybe they have a Super Bowl hangover. But then they go on a tear. I got them winning at San Francisco, maybe mainly because Trey Lance. I don't, I don't know if he's going to have it completely figured out by week 4. I think they'll get it going, but I just think the Rams will run off a few and then they'll lose at home versus San Francisco just because that's kind of how those inter-division games go between the 49ers and Rams the past few years. I think they beat the Bucks and then they go on a streak. Winning at Kansas City is going to be a real test because, the last time that happened, I mean, you remember what happened to the Rams in Kansas City, a couple years ago, and they had the shootout where they both scored over, 50 some points. And that could easily happen again. But then they play the Raiders and the Packers and the Chargers 3 of the last 5 weeks of the season. It's going to be really tough for them. I think. But I do think the Rams could win as many as 15 games. I don't think they're losing more than 5. I think they're going to be 12-5 or greater. And then you go to the Cardinals, and the real issue with the Cardinals is, there was some offseason controversy between Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, whether it be his contract talks and then what was put in the contract. They're without DeAndre Hopkins for a portion of the season. And you wonder, like, I got them winning versus Kansas City week 1. That's probably my main upset pick. And the only reason I say that is because anything can happen. I think Kansas City's good, but I think the Cardinals have a good enough team to win. The problem is the loss of Chandler Jones. That's probably what I think the main reason I picked that game is because I think the Cardinals are talented, and I think they have enough to win a grab game. Like they come out and shock the team and they win. That's my shocker for week 1. At the Raiders, I think they lose. At versus the Rams, they lose. But then they play Carolina. Philadelphia's gonna be a tough test. They're gonna beat Seattle. They're probably gonna beat New Orleans. They might beat Minnesota, but I think the Cardinals realistically, I have them between 6 to 9 wins. I just think that they've had problems in the end of the past few years, and I think that they could easily lose some of those games. DeAndre Hopkins isn't there, but they could shock everybody and win the Kansas City game. And honestly, I probably think I should have changed it, but I'm gonna go with it now because I didn't change it before I made the video, so I'm just gonna keep it there. The 49ers at 12-5, I think that's pretty realistic. I moved the reasonable win total down to 10-13. I don't think I think the 49ers roster is too good to not win double digit games. But I think it's going to be the development of Trey Lance and having Jimmy Garoppolo still there. How's that going to affect the mojo on the team? And what happens if the 49ers struggle early? Realistically, I think they're 12-5. They're going to have some probably missed games. They'll probably hit on some of these games, though, that I see a shocking game that I have is them losing at Denver. I don't think I don't really I don't really know how that one's going to go. And at the are they going to sweep the Cardinals or not? Seattle is a struggle bus for them, and honestly, it was part of what I said earlier about picking the teams that weren't really that great, trying to figure out what games they win, what games they lose, and I don't know. Seattle loses Russell Wilson. Is Geno Smith or Drew Lock starting? They're like I said, you're taking a team that didn't do well last year, and you're taking away the best player on the team, the best 2 players on the team. Bobby Wagner's gone too, so you took your leader on offense and defense. They're both gone, and so I think it's going to be a rebuild for Seattle. Go down to the NFC South. The Panthers get Baker Mayfield, which is huge for them. And I think the Cleveland game is going to be Baker's redemption game because that's what I did with the Deshaun Watson at Houston game in week 13. I think Baker's going to come out and he's going to dice them up. You're going to have some serious playing, but Christian McCaffrey, if he's good, if Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, all these guys come out and just play pretty decent, it's going to be more of, is Cleveland's pass rush going to be able to get to Baker before he's able to get these throws off in a new offense? But then I think the Panthers win the first 3 games, but then they go on a major losing streak. And honest to God, they could beat Arizona, and I don't see any problem with them doing that. But I think they lose that game, but then they play the 49ers and the Rams and the Bucks, and then I got them losing at Atlanta. And the only reason I have them losing at Atlanta is because it seems like that's one of those games every single year that the Panthers and Falcons split. It's just one of them series. It's, Steelers Ravens. Not as big of a rivalry, but it's kind of like 49ers Rams. It doesn't matter. They're going to split. It just feels like it. And so I got them beating um I got them beating the Falcons. I think they're going to split the home games. They're going to win each other's home games. But then they got to go to Baltimore. They got to play the Broncos. Then they're going to beat Seattle. The Pittsburgh game, I don't think they win that one. They could compete in it definitely, and then they could win at New Orleans. But I have the Panthers at 6-11. But I think they could go 8-9, no problem. And if they shocked everybody, they probably could go 9-8 or 10-7. But I don't see it. The Saints, kind of almost in the same boat as the Panthers. The only thing really different is the Saints defense is still pretty steady, pretty solid. Run defense is pretty decent. Um, Obviously it's going to be how good is Jameis now versus then. Is Jameis going to come out and play good? Is Taysom Hill going to take a lot of snaps away? What is the Saints going to do? And I do pick them having a big losing streak because the Saints schedule has a rough patch. I mean, they play the Bengals, the Cardinals, the Raiders, the Ravens, the Steelers, the Rams, and the 49ers, and the Bucks in a row. And it's going to be a bunch of tough games for them, but I think they finish strong. And they win the last 4 games and go 7-10. The Bucks, I mean, they lose too big, too big. Ryan Jensen, Ali Marpet were two huge losses to the offensive line, and that's the one thing that's gave Tom Brady problems throughout his career is if the offensive line is not great. I think that you're looking at a team that is solid offensively, solid defensively. It's going to be a matter of that line and how they hold up. But if you look at their schedule, like I've been saying, realistically, they should probably beat the Cowboys and they should beat the Saints. Saints have gave Tom Brady problems since he's been there. But I think this is the year that they push through. They're probably going to lose against Green Bay because Green Bay's defense is solid. They might still be figuring things out offensively. I've got them beating Kansas City, which is another Kansas City game that I'll probably get, people disagreeing or whatnot. That's probably 2 Kansas City games that they could, realistically be 13-4. And that's why I have the reasonable win totals. But then I got them, I got the Bucks beating the Falcons. They're going to win at Pittsburgh. They're going to win at Carolina. Then they lose to the Ravens and the Rams. They'll beat the Seahawks and Browns. But they go in and they win a game at San Francisco, loses the Bengals, and they win 3 straight. The Falcons are another team that I do not know how well they're going to do. Marcus Mariota, they could, and like I said, they could easily win games at Seattle. They could win the game at Carolina. They could win at Washington. They may be able to compete in another game, but I think 2-5 is reasonable. I don't think they're going to win just one game, but I don't know if 5-12 is probably their best case scenario. And then you look at a team like you look into the NFC East, which is a lot of people have said worst division in football. I think Philadelphia's got a solid roster this year, and I think they're going to shock some people. Realistically, I feel like Philadelphia could win 11 games. I feel like they could win 12 games, honestly, but I only think 11 is reasonable for right now. I don't think Dallas will make the playoffs, barely, but I don't think they'll make the playoffs. I also think the Washington Commanders are going to be a team that it's not good enough to make the playoffs, not a 500 team, but they're going to, be respectable some games. They'll probably lose all their major games. And then the Giants, unfortunately, just like the Jets, I don't think the Giants really, you cut your best defensive player in Blake Martinez, and I don't know. Daniel Jones is really going to have to show some stuff this year. But I mean, if they struggle against most of the teams, it's not really going to be a shocking thing. And then if you go up here to so I've already went over the records, and here's the playoffs. If this will scroll over, this is the wild card divisional conference. Obviously, I got the Bills as the number 1 seed. The Bengals, Colts, Raiders. So we got the Bills, Bengals, Colts, Raiders, Chiefs, Chargers, and that's going to be. Oh no, sorry, I goofed. The Ravens are the 5 seed, so it's going to be Bills, Bengals, Colts, and then we got to go the Raiders, then the Ravens, then the Chiefs, then the Chargers. Like that's going to be it. Obviously, the shocker, and I know everybody's gonna say it's a shocker, but I do have the Chargers beating the Bengals at home in the first round. I think the Raiders are going to beat the Raiders are going to beat the Ravens, and I think the Chiefs are going to beat the Colts. In the divisional, I think that the Bills beat the Chargers, and I think the Chiefs beat the Raiders. And then I got Kansas City losing to Buffalo. I think Buffalo finally overcomes it, and the Bills are in the Super Bowl. So for the NFC, what I've got is I've got the Packers once again getting the 1 seed, the Packers, Rams, Bucks, Eagles, 49ers, Vikings, and Cardinals. Cardinals are just going to be good enough, and I had to go over the strength of schedule stuff to determine if the Cowboys or the Cardinals are going to make the playoffs. And I'm pretty certain that the Cardinals are going to get the strength of schedule over the Cowboys as they didn't play each other. And either way, that team's going to have to play the Rams and they're going to lose. So we got the Rams beating the Cardinals. We got the 49ers beating the Eagles. And we got the Buccaneers beating the Vikings, which essentially had the same four as last year in the divisional. And for that, same results. I think the Rams beat the Bucks, and I think the 49ers beat the Packers. And then I think the Rams beat the 49ers in the NFC Championship again. And so now we got the Bills and the Rams in the Super Bowl. And for me, I picked the why I did that. We got the I got the Bills beating the Rams in the Super Bowl. I think that's how it's going to go down. Um, realistically, it's hard to win a second time. It's hard to repeat in any sport, but it's especially hard in the NFL whenever you mess up one game and it's done. There's no series. It's just a one and done type deal. I think that this this is a gonna be a season where there's gonna be a talent discrepancy, and basically what I mean by that is there in baseball there are a bunch of teams since the salary cap's a little controversial in some people's minds, but you can pretty much outbid teams in the MLB if you got money to get. So the talent discrepancy becomes large. In the NFL, you can't necessarily do that. But this year, I just feel like there's going to be a clear divide between the really, really good teams and the teams that aren't as good. But I think it's going to be, the really, really good teams and then those mid tier teams. So, your Titans, your maybe your Cardinals, your Dolphins, your Saints, Panthers, maybe even the Cowboys. Those teams are going to be a step down from the top dogs. And some of that could be scheduling because, you look at it realistically, do I think the Packers are going to go 15-2 and the Bills are going to go 15-2? Probably not. But if you look at their schedule, you're like, well, I mean realistically what? Green Bay could, lose um Green Bay could lose to the Rams, but I don't know if I don't know. Like that would shift them both to 14-4. Rams would have the 1 seed, and that's a game changing if they got the 1 seed. So that could happen. I would say those major shifts since they're playing head to head, that could happen. But the Green Bay finds a way to roll them off at the end of the year. The Eagles are going to be the division winner in NFC East, which I feel like it's going to be huge. The AFC West, like I said, is going to be a bloodbath of a conference because I think all those teams could make the playoffs. In theory, the Broncos could flip, especially if they win the game versus the Ravens. If the Broncos win the game versus the Ravens and then win another game, they knock the Ravens out, and all four of the AFC West teams are in the playoffs. It's just that easy. But it's just a matter of it's the AFC's tough, the NFC's not as tough, and I think this is kind of how it's shaping up. And like I said, the reasonable win totals are for like, do I think this team? Obviously, if you look at the AFC West, I have the Chiefs. They could win 14 games, and that's experience. And it's those 3 other games that I showed down at the bottom. That the Cardinals, and then the other game that they probably should win, but I don't know. But I feel like Josh Allen comes through. The Bills win the Super Bowl. They beat the Rams, and the Bills curse is done in the Super Bowl. And obviously, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with certain games or records, but I feel like it's important that if you just go out and guess the record, it's funny because people put all these records, and then in your head you're like, well, that's not possible. Like you can't have so many teams with that good of a record, so many teams with that bad of a record. But I think this is a fair shot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. Um, Realistically, what I plan on doing is doing this every week. It's gonna be a short video every week, kind of just going over that week's games, maybe the last week's, how many did I get right, this week's, do I think this is still correct? And I'll make different tabs. Like this one's preseason. I'll make a tab for week 1, week 2, week 3, all the way up. But if anybody's still watching, I appreciate it. I've tried to keep my face cam out of it as much as possible so we can see all the data. But yeah, football's back. It's exciting. Yeah, go Steelers, and I appreciate it, guys.